Hi guys, so today's topic is SAML authentication, and the topics that we will be covering today when it comes to SAML authentication, we will be starting from the theory part, what is single sign-on, and then we will deep dive into the SAML workflow, what are the different types of entities which are involved when it comes to SAML authentication, and then we will dissect the SAML response that we will be getting from the identity provider. Don't worry about the terminology that I'm using here like identity provider. We will be talking about these terminologies more in the upcoming slides. Then we will move towards the basic attacks or common attacks that we can perform against SAML authentication. We will be talking about these attacks in the subsequent videos. Maybe there might be more than 3 or 4 videos that would cover the attacks that we can perform when it comes to SAML authentication. Under the basic attack section, we will be talking about arbitrary signature, in which we will see that the SAML response that we usually get from the identity provider. We will see the signature part in that SAML response, and we will try to modify some of the bits or characters in the signature part, and then we will forward this request to the service provider and see how is it behaving. If it is accepting those signatures as well as a valid signature, then it will come under the category of arbitrary signature attack or arbitrary signature vulnerability. Signature stripping attack, in which we will completely remove the signature value from the SAML response, and then we will forward the SAML response to the service provider and see how it behaves. SAML token replay attack. So according to the security recommendation, the SAML response that we get from the identity provider should only be utilized once by the service provider. If it is getting used by the service provider multiple times, and we can make the service provider to set the session identifiers like cookies or tokens multiple times using a single SAML response that we get from the identity provider, then we will consider it as SAML token replay attack vulnerability. SAML response expiry validation. There are some attributes in the SAML response that are responsible for the validity and lifetime of the SAML document. We will be talking about those. If those checks are not properly implemented, or if those attributes are not properly checked on the service provider, then we will consider it as a SAML response expiry validation vulnerability. And eventually, slowly we will move towards the advanced attack section, in which we will start from SSRF vulnerability. So there are some libraries which are used to fetch the SAML response, or to when it comes to SAML authentication implementation, there are some default libraries that developers can utilize to fetch the SAML response. PySAML2 is one of the library. So if this library has been used to fetch the SAML response, then how can we perform the SSRF on the SAML authentication workflow? Certificate faking attack, known key attack, comment injection attack, in which we will insert some of the comments in the different fields like name ID or user ID when it comes to SAML authentication, and we will see how the service provider is processing those comments. Signature wrapping attack. So this would be a kind of complete training series that would be applicable for SAML authentication. We will be starting from the theory part, then we will cover the basic part, and then we'll move towards the advanced attack part. So now let us start from very basic, what is SSO authentication, and let me cover a brief background for the SSO authentication. Why do actually need the SSO authentication? So for an organization or for a company, there could be multiple applications, like 40-50 plus applications that can be utilized by their employees to have the business running. Now, for each and every application, if the SAML authentication is not present in the company, then they have to manage the authentication module. They have to develop the custom module for authentication for each and every application. So they have to manage password policies, they have to manage rate limiting issues at authentication part, the authentication password complexities, and these are the they do have to take care of all of the vulnerabilities when it comes to authentication part. and they have to do it in the repeated fashion. So whenever you are implementing or whenever you are designing application from scratch, then you have to develop the authentication module separately for that application. Now here the SSO authentication or SAML authentication will come into picture. Now you can rely, if you are using SSO authentication, you can just relay the authentication part to the third party server, or this third party server we will be calling as the identity provider or identity provider server, and this server would be responsible for the authentication part. We will just be integrating the authentication part from the identity provider, and now it won't be a responsibility, or it won't be the responsibility of the application team to have the implementation of authentication related mitigations or authentication related checks like rate limiting and password resetting and password complexities. These kind of issues would come into the bucket of the person or the team who is managing the identity server. So that is the advantage we will be getting when it comes to SAML authentication. And also it also come with the user convenient. User don't have to remember multiple usernames and password for different kind of applications that are running in the company's environment. And they just, since they will be using a single password for each and every application, so mostly they will the password policies we can build as complex as it can. And there would be there won't be any difficulty for user to remember a single password as compared to different passwords for the applications. So that is where, or that is why we use SSO authentication or single sign-on authentication. Now let us talk about the different components or different parties which are involved in the SAML authentication. So there are generally three parties or three components of SAML authentication. We can say the three pillars of SAML authentication. The first one is user agent, second one is service provider, and the third one is identity provider. User agent, you can consider it as the browser of the client. The service provider would be the application server, and the identity provider would be the server that would be responsible for the authentication part. Now let us start one by one. We will send a request to the application. For example, we are browsing the application www.example.com, and it does have SAML authentication implemented. So the first request that we will be sending to the application like www.example.com, we are browsing it in a browser. Since we are not authenticated, now the service provider will redirect us to the identity provider, and it will say to us that I can only provide you access to the authenticated area after the successful authentication has been done from the identity provider. Now our user agent would go to the identity provider, and there could be implementation of MFA code as well on the identity provider. So you have to enter your username and password, and then you have to enter the MFA code that is sent on your mobile device or somewhere else, and the complete authentication would be dependent upon the identity provider. At the end of step 3, when the authentication step has been completed successfully and you have entered all of the things in a correct format, then the identity provider will give you, or will give the user agent, a SAML response. The SAML response would be an XML document that would be containing the information about the user who has authenticated from the identity provider, so that the service provider can give access to the user agent. Now this SAML response would be forwarded to the service provider, and most of the vulnerabilities that we will be discussing about SAML authentication would come under this step or after this step. Forward SAML response, the fifth step. So we will see if the service provider is not checking the SAML response that is getting forwarded by the user agent, then it can lead to authentication bypass or complete authentication bypass vulnerability as well in the SAML authentication. And if for example, now here suppose the service provider has validated the SAML response that was forwarded by the user agent. Now the service provider will set up the session identifiers. It could be in the form of cookies or it could be in the form of token as well. And now once the service provider will set up the session identifier in the client browser, now the client browser can access the application and can access the post login functionalities in the application. So that is how the authentication, the SAML authentication flow gets completed. Now let us talk about SAML response dissection. So you remember we talk about that we will be getting the SAML response from the identity provider, and this SAML response would get forwarded to the service provider after successful authentication. So what does this SAML response contains? So it would be a long string base64 URL encoded string, and we will have to decode it. We will first have to decode it in the base in the URL using any URL decoder, and then we have to decode it in the base64 format, and then you will be getting this kind of SAML document. This is how the SAML response would look like. We will have to see the certain attributes which plays a crucial role in the SAML authentication. We will do it one by one. So now you get an idea that there are different types of attributes which are involved in the SAML authentication, like signature value is there and some reference is there, and name ID is there. Name ID would be containing the username that has been authenticated from the identity provider, and for this user the service provider would provide the access to the user agent if it is valid user. Oh, let us zoom a little bit into the different types of attributes which are present in the SAML response. This is the name ID parameter, the user ID for which we have authenticated from the identity provider. It will be in the name ID tag. The second one is signature part. The signature part would be in the ds:\signature value attribute, and this would be a long string, and we will be seeing different types of attacks that we can perform on the signature value here. The expiry attribute, there are two attributes which are responsible for the expiry of the SAML document. The first attribute would be in the subject confirmation data tag, that is not on or after, and the second attribute would be in the conditions tag, that is not on or after. So we will be talking about these attributes separately in the separate video when we will be talking about the SAML response expiry validation attack. So, but for now, just remember that these are the two attributes that would be responsible for the expiry or the lifetime of the SAML response. Reference URI. Reference URI tells us which part of the SAML response has been signed. So it would be containing a string that identifies the part of SAML response uniquely, basically the assertion. We will see how can we perform the SSRF vulnerability attack on the reference URI in the later videos. Certificate. The certificate value would be there in DSX509 data. This would be the public key of the identity provider that would be used to verify the signature of the SAML response. So these are some of the attributes that I wanted to talk about in this video. Now in the upcoming videos we will be starting from the basic attacks that we can perform in the SAML authentication. We will be talking about arbitrary signature and signature wrapping attack, and then we will move slowly towards the advanced attack. But that is all I wanted to talk about in this video. Thank you for listening.